Hello, my name is Kate Holterhoff. I am a senior analyst at Red Monk, and with me today I have Abbey Perini. So excited to talk to her. She is a web dev and technical writer at Hygiena, she's a local Atlantan, so we get to hang out all the time. Most recently at ViewConf, which was a lot of fun.
It was a good time.
So I invited Abbey on here specifically to talk to me about something that I'd never heard of before, which is the relationship between fiber arts and programming. And I think we're all kind of familiar, broad strokes, with the Jacquard loom and punch cards and all of this. So I knew there was something there. But apparently, Abby's been doing a deep dive on all this, and I wanted to hear more. So I invited her on the show to tell me all the things she's been learning. She is going to be doing something a little different than we typically do on the MonkCast, which is giving us kind of a condensed version of a presentation that she gave at CodeMash. And it's on the history of fiber arts here. So I'm going to be mostly quiet while she talks about it. And then we're going to get into questions afterwards. And I'm super jazzed for the depth that this is going to bring to our conversation here. So we're trying it out. But before we dig into all that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Who are you? What do you do? What are you excited about?
So I started learning code in 2020. I've been in the industry for about 6 years now. And as part of boot camp, I was challenged to start writing. And so I started doing a lot of technical writing, and people liked that for some reason, and that took off. So now I have something over 500,000 views. I stopped counting at that point, but I love explaining technical concepts to beginners, laymen, things like that. It's something that I excel at. And that naturally turned into speaking at conferences because, as Kate knows, our Atlanta tech community really loves making people speak in front of crowds. So that is how I got here. And Kate and I were talking at one of those conferences about hobbies and crafts and things like that. And I do a lot of crafts. It's definitely one of my interests. So we started talking about a workshop I had given at CodeMash in January, where I taught people how to knit and crochet, and gave this talk that I'm about to summarize for y'all. What else am I up to?
Well, what are you crafting right now? What are you building? Is it something for Dragon Con? What are you doing?
Yes, multiple things. I'm about to finish a pair of socks and from knitting, and then I'm working on costumes from Slay the Spire 2. So I'm sewing my husband a cloak, and then I have to make some sort of crazy wrap dress thing for my costume, as well as all the other projects. I have a mutual friend of ours, Kayla, 3D printing a bunch of things for me so that I can then build on top of it to create all these masks and stuff. And hopefully I'm going to use what I learned at CodeMash and put electronics in there so that it lights up. So fingers crossed.
Wow. And for folks who aren't familiar, what is CodeMash exactly? It sounds a little bit different from a lot of tech conferences.
Yeah. So a lot of conferences will be in a Kalahari, which is an indoor water park. And CodeMash, I believe, was one of the first ones to do it. It's in Ohio, in Sandusky, which is about an hour out of Cleveland, I think. Please don't come for me if I don't know my Ohio geography. I've been twice. But it is not just focused on like one tool. Like we love ViewConf, that's focused on one tool, but it's focused on pretty much anything about programming. There will be 2 or 3 talks at a time, lots of speakers, lots of stuff going on, and then also an entire maker's space. So I took Electronics 101, and intro to soldering. I can finally solder. And I taught fiber arts classes, as well as there's a whole 3D printing lab. People sell stuff. There's the game room is addictive and concerning. I would be like, oh my God, it's like 11:30. I have to go to bed. But just one more game in the game room. So it's a really cool conference. It's very diverse. It's very varied. And I had a great time. Even though
amazing.
The more time you spend in a Kalahari, the more you feel like you're in a liminal space and you're just like leaving a piece of yourself there. And you're like, my landmarks are the sassy giraffe and the gorilla. Where am I? What's happening?
I don't see a problem with this. That's the liminal space I want to occupy. So, hey, I'm into it. That sounds incredible. I have not been, but you're certainly making me, CodeMash curious here. This is
CodeMash curious. It's my job.
Sounds like a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think I'm speaking at Nebraska Code this month, KCDC in September, and Tech Bash in October.
Phenomenal. This is exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're doing all the things. You're traveling a bunch. I'm glad you could carve out a little time to tell me all this cool stuff that you've been researching in relation to fiber art. So, yeah. I mean, so I don't even know where to dig in here. So, let me just preface this by saying you do have a blog post about this as well.
Yeah.
So, for folks who need to research further, that'd be a good place to start. But maybe let's just begin with the Vikings, right? Okay, so yeah, talk to me about where all this began.
Yeah, I do need to update that blog post. It's on my to-do list of the 1,000 things I need to do. Okay, so fiber arts themselves are anything that you're creating with yarn, string, and thread, right? So crochet and knitting, people usually know about embroidery, weaving, macrame, felting, quilting, sewing, basket weaving, rug hooking, lace, textile arts, jewelry, like anything you're making with thread. And the earliest one that we know about is Viking knalbinding, which it used a bone needle and to sew in between the loops of thread, and it comes out looking a lot like what we expect from knitting, right? And so this is just the earliest scrap we've found from about 6,500 BCE. But textile arts have been a huge part of human culture for a very long time. We're wearing clothes right now. We've been wearing clothes for a while. Clothes were necessary for survival. So since the dawn of civilization, we've been doing that. But the Han Dynasty in China from about 206 BCE to 220 CE, we saw the draw loom really become a big thing. And the textile arts surrounding that and looms as a whole just come about during that time. And we think now these days, because it's so ubiquitous and we don't think about, fast fashion, we just buy clothes. Like a lot of us don't think about where they come from or how they were made or the technology behind that. So a lot of people don't realize that these are like a trade, just like carpentry or anything like that. You produce things that can help you survive, improve your quality of life, or sell. And people also don't realize that fiber arts have been used as spy tradecraft. So as an espionage. So during World War II, the British government banned knitting patterns, fearing that they could communicate information to the Germans. And when I update that blog, I will add a link to a very, very cool piece of writing about the covert role of knitting during the French Revolution, because people kind of know about the ladies knitting during all of the executions, but they don't know what that was about. Because they don't really remember that fiber arts used to be required for survival. People used to be making things all the time. So one of my favorite examples, although it was a very bad time for the Irish, so maybe favorite isn't a great word for that, was Irish crochet lace. During the potato famine, up to 20,000 girls were being paid to make Irish crochet, and they were selling them across Europe and America. And so eventually whole families turned it into a cottage industry. They would protect their designed motifs so that nobody else knew how to make the special motifs that they were making, the little patterns in the lace. And then they would take all of the things that they had made and turn them into a lace making center in town. And then they would be turned into wedding gowns, coats to go over for, just to jazz up your outfit, things like that, until we figured out how to mass produce lace. Another great example is Coast Salish knitting. I know that you have seen a Kowichan sweater. I don't think I pronounced that word correctly, but they became really, really popular in the 80s, and white women turned them into a bunch of patterns, and so they moved away from the traditional motifs. But the Salish coast, which is the west coast of Canada, Indigenous peoples had come up with these beautiful patterns with these motifs that were special to them as a way to survive and to sell in the colonial economy that they had been forced into. So all of that to say that we don't remember how much of an impact fiber arts have had on us as humans. And so that story of how fiber arts and computing came together has really been lost as well, because programming today wouldn't exist without fiber. Everybody, as you said, knows about the Jacquard loom. There's one in the MIMS Museum in Atlanta, in Roswell, where you can go and they'll do demonstrations of them using the punch cards to make textiles using the Jacquard loom. And it made it easy to quickly and easily change the pattern of textiles, but it reduced the weaver from a coder of weaves to an operator stepping on a pedal. And the reason that a lot of programmers know about the Jacquard loom is because there's an Ada Lovelace quote that is, "We may say most aptly that the analytical engine weaves algebraical patterns just as the Jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves." But calling the Jacquard loom the ancestor of the modern computer is a misconception, right? It's the end of the story because mechanical harnesses were used in looms in Persia almost 2,000 years earlier. A small wooden cylinder with a circular linen strip with wooden pegs glued to it was the Upper Austria's version in the 17th century. But the Jacquard loom was the first machine to use punched cards, which is why a lot of people associate it with the computer because we had those computers that used punched cards. But the Jacquard loom doesn't work algebraically. It's really great for like portraits and pictures. It addresses each strand individually, so like each pixel in an image, essentially, instead of making these patterns that are repeatable, which is what weaving had been up until that point. And we've talked a lot about Luddites recently because of the whole AI thing, but like textile manufacturers weren't impressed by the Jacquard loom. It was very inflexible. They didn't see a cost benefit. It made operating a loom much more physically demanding and rarely faster. The thing that it did speed up was preparing the loom and changing the patterns, which historically had taken a lot of time. But if you just produce the same thing a lot, like you don't have to change the pattern a lot. So the trade-offs weren't really there for them. The real ancestor of the modern computer was weaving notation. So in the 18th century, books made the art of weaving public. They used standardized binary notation and algebraic patterns, and the Jacquard loom turned that into punch cards, which was a visible thing that engineers could see. So they had these books and they had the punch cards, and they were like, oh, we can use this to create automated looms and eventually computers. So the Jacquard loom punch cards transferred binary notation and algebraic thinking from the brains of weavers to calculating engines. And there's another quote that I have from a 1976 computer science book where they're talking about how weaving is in particular important in our present day advance from serial to parallel processing. Weaving, in contrast to mathematics, is a naturally parallel process and might give us more ideas than we think. But Kate, when I talk about fiber arts, do you think of it as highly skilled labor?
No, I tend to think of like folks doing crafts, you know? I mean, it seems to be enjoyable, something that I see my friends have picked up, a lot of them during COVID, as something to keep their hands busy, maybe while they're watching garbage TV, or if they have to sit through something that maybe is a little boring, they, they'll be crocheting a scarf, maybe doing a little knitting on the side. But let me just throw out here, as someone who cannot do it, has not learned, I'm deeply envious because it looks very cool. So,
yeah, I mean, happy to share my 101 docs. Happy to have a Atlanta Tech knitting circle for him. You know,
all right, it's a date. Yeah,
we see that pattern through a lot of different traditionally thought of as female pastimes or jobs or anything like that. Like women's labor is often undervalued to the point of the way that we talk about it. So when we talk about how MIT hired women to weave core rope memory, and that was used in the Apollo program, it's referred to as little old lady memory or space age needleworkers. And people have forgotten that this was an early form of RAM that made the Block 2 Apollo guidance computer possible. It had 18 times more storage than magnetic core memory and was the standard solution at the time, but it required people weaving core rope to get it to work. And you had to weave it in a way that made it possible for the memory to be stored. So women like Hilda Carpenter, who assembled core rope memory for the iconic Whirlwind computer developed at MIT, were mostly uncredited and forgotten. I mean, this is a story that we see throughout history, like the original programmers for the ENAIC, I think it's called, were credited as models. Like they were like, oh yeah, they're just standing next to the computer to make it look good in these photos. And it's like they were They were programming it. They're the only reason it worked. And they weren't even invited to dinner to celebrate the like first successful presentation after, or credited, or their names were lost to history. So people have come together and created things like a core memory rope quilt, where they have woven the core memory rope and then made that into a quilt. And when it's activated with electricity, it plays audio recordings and sends tweets detailing firsthand accounts of the Apollo project. And we have fiber arts influencing programming and computers and everything, but that relationship goes both ways, because as technology gets better and better, we use it in a variety of ways that we wouldn't have expected. And there's one artist that I highlight in my talk called Jovencia de la Paz, and he's a weaver artist who uses a digital loom to write unique patterns in software that generate patterns algorithmically. So the textile sort of grows based on algorithmic ideas. I encourage people to look him up. It is very cool 3D fiber arts that are creating all these little squares and diamonds and patterns. Very awesome. I myself took part in a project called Granny Life Crochet that is currently hanging in the Maison de Poincaré Museum in Paris. And all of the community members came together and made individual crochet squares. If you've ever seen one of those crochet blankets that's made out of squares, that's called a granny square. And so the pattern, the way you make the square is the same every time, but there was a web app that generated different digital patterns for each square. So where you would put the color versus the white. And so we have this beautiful double-sided blanket made by a whole community, and everything about it, pattern-wise, was generated using math that I don't understand. People talk a lot about knitting machines. Crochet machines do exist, but it's a little bit harder to automate crochet because it's more of a building rather than a weaving or knitting, which is more like fabric. And just because I crocheted for many years before I picked up knitting, I do have to talk about crochet hyperbolic planes. So mathematicians couldn't figure out how to model like coral hyperbolic planes that form in nature. They were like, I can't make this work, until the crocheters were like, we got this.
Wow.
Crochet is perfect for modeling hyperbolic planes and coral. So you can see huge crochet coral reefs by Christina Margaret Wertham. And then you can pick up their patterns and make your own. Those are in museums. But a lot of people, when they think of programming and knitting, they think about computational knitting. So we have these knitting machines, they have a bunch of needles, and they'll just print out, almost like 3D printing, whatever you program into them. So if you generate a pattern, that's computational knitting. And then if you had a knitting machine and they stopped supporting them and you were at all tech savvy, you would then hack the knitting machine to make sure that you could still knit despite the fact that nobody was creating software for it anymore. So that became pretty common when there was a boom of knitting machines, and then they were like, we're not into this anymore. We're going to stop supporting them or making them or anything like that. And then I have talked to a company that does it's now Loopscape. Their technology is called Stereo Knit, and they create sustainable, reduce waste, on-demand 3D knit technology. So the whole point is to program it so that you don't have to, like when you're sewing, when you do anything but a rectangle, you are inherently wasting fabric, right? Because you'll have like a weird triangle that you can't use for anything else that you'll have to toss. Whereas 3D knitting uses exactly the materials that it needs. There's no waste, and it's a great sustainable, like the opposite of fast fashion, right? But one of the big things that people don't really think about, because it's been around for so many years at this point, is how Ravelry, the website, affected knitting and crochet in around the world. So I talk to a lot of local yarn store owners because if I go to a new place, I'm like, hey, let me go grab a local skein of yarn, which is how we end up with this much yarn. And when the website came on the scene, it was the first time that people had a central place to share all of these patterns and techniques in PDFs in whatever language they wanted and talk about these crafts. And this created an explosion of interest in innovation in 2007. And knitters and crocheters are now primarily 25 to 35 years old. So before Ravelry, after Ravelry, are like night and day for local yarn store owners. They're like, yeah, we were scraping by, and then all of a sudden Ravelry came on the scene, and then everyone wanted to learn how to knit and crochet. We saw an explosion of interest. So now there are indie dyed yarn is a huge thing. Fiber shows and festivals have good attendance. But as an accessibility enthusiast, I do have to point out that when they redesigned their site, they did exactly what you're not supposed to do with accessibility. And there'll be a whole blog linked in that when I share that new updated
Yeah.
blog.
Huh.
All right. So I know you program. How do you think patterns and programs are similar? Just off the top of
Oh,
your
man. Well, it seems like there's something about like discrete components, right, that are reusable. And so I get the impression that it's almost like cooking, where it's like you can follow these directions to ensure that you're going to get the result that you've been promised. So in my mind, it's about like ensuring that you have the units that you need to have a particular result. And so, yeah, if I'm doing any sort of coding project, that feels very similar to what I see knitters doing when they are just kind of repeating a loop to ensure that they eventually get this sweater or whatever their pattern has promised them.
Exactly on point per usual. Yeah, so the pattern is like a program and the finished object is like the output. And so we can use patterns to teach like pattern tracing, Oh, my finished object doesn't look like the picture. Where did I go wrong in following these instructions? Or were the instructions wrong? Like those kinds of things. Good pattern writers use dry, don't repeat yourself. So making those discrete components. And then patterns are QA tested for correctness, scalability, the look of the finished project. They're done by testers following the pattern and technical editors. They have people coming in who are like, oh, using these acronyms that are commonly known would be better and make this more succinct. And they have a whole profession around that, just like we have QA and technical writers. Pattern developers often prefer open source software like Darktable, GIMP, Libre, Stitch Mastery. And then, like assembly languages, operands are pushed and popped onto the tool. There have even been markup languages and Java languages and Lisp languages for putting out a knitting pattern. When you go to debug a pattern, you look at logical errors, which would be runtime in a program, or following the pattern didn't give you the expected finished object, like I was just talking about, or interface errors with components or modules of a program communicating incorrectly. That would be like spelling errors or confusing inconsistencies in the pattern. Encoding errors, difficulty processing the program's script versus a mismatch in communication styles. So like, I don't like following charts because it's a big grid and you have to remember what row you're on, and then you have to match that up to the picture and like I prefer written instructions. So if there was a pattern that only had charts, I would probably skip it and do something else because it's just a mismatch in how I like to do things. There can be memory leaks, which we know what memory leaks are in programming, but like things that overwhelm the crafter's short-term memory. So if you're having to remember too many repeats, too many things going on, that can also be very problematic. I mentioned charts. Patterns use charts, just like Python and JavaScript use symbols and keywords to tell the computer what the desired output is. The pattern is telling you, the human, what they want with symbols. And then there's been a lot of research around using fiber crafting and as a way to teach computation. So it would be different materials for different concepts. So like weaving was better for the performance of automation and fabric manipulation for 3D modeling. But especially like for and while loops, they're used a lot in knitting and crochet patterns. But a while loop is described as like until. So you keep doing something until something else happens. And that's a much easier intro to while loops than a lot of the ways that while loops are explained in like teaching programming. So we have seen that programmers can learn not only from the patterns themselves, but the way that the online community has developed standards for iteration conditions, documenting design, and explaining things to beginners, because over time, knitting patterns have evolved to precise line-by-line procedures that are akin to programs. And then I can give a few examples of how you can get even further into like combining programming and fiber arts, but that's pretty much the presentation I gave at CodeMash. And
Amazing.
yeah,
No, thank you for doing this. So I have lots of questions.
good.
First question. So it seems like a real tension here has to do with like automation versus craft and the intrinsic good of crafting. So talk to me. I mean, I feel like there's a natural fit with AI here. Can you talk to me about how AI has maybe disrupted the fiber craft industry, and like what's your take on that tension? Like where does it come from?
So the main thing that people are complaining about right now is AI generated patterns so they
Okay.
generate an image, and then the AI is supposed to generate the instructions for how to make the thing in the image. And there'll be things like, oh, it's a doll and it has legs, and then the pattern itself won't tell you how to make the legs at all. Or it'll just be such gobbledygook because people can generate them extremely fast. And so they're like, oh, I'm just going to put this up on Etsy is a common place to go, Ravelry a lot. So you'll pay $7 and then have to be like, this doesn't do as described. And there's not a lot of ways to keep these people responsible, right? You give them a bunch of 1-star reviews on their Etsy store, they'll just go and open another one and do it all over again. So even beyond, I saw an article this morning that was describing like vibe coders as builders and people who care about codecraft as keepers or something, which isn't inherently like, they're the gatekeepers or something.
Yeah,
But like,
really.
there's a difference between I just care about doing the craft by hand. I mean, there's the constant joke about crafters where like, sure, I could buy it for $30, but I would rather spend 20 hours of my life and $80 making it. But it's less about like, I just demand that I have all handmade things, and more like, this is something that I enjoy doing. It doesn't inherently need to be productive or make me money. And when I go to a pattern, I expect that someone has made this thing before and tested it. And especially if I'm paying money for it. If it's free, I don't really care. But we've seen that people think, oh, you can just do it, not even put all your effort into it, not make sure it's great. And then people don't want to buy your patterns at that
Right.
point. And when it was on a small scale, that was easy enough to be like, oh, you can look out for this, you can look out for this. But like, if you're not AI literate and you can't see that the hand holding the doll has 7 fingers, like there's no way for you to be like, oh, this was definitely AI generated before you see the content of the pattern.
Oh man. So AI slop has come for the fiber arts community.
Definitely.
Thoughts and prayers. I don't know. That's
not shocking. No.
yeah, I know. You're right. It is not shocking, but it's you always wonder like what the incentive structure is. Like, I guess they're just making enough money that it's worth the tokens to fool everybody. I mean, I don't know.
We'll see.
We'll see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So AI, that's the obvious one.
Yeah.
Do you have any other takes on like, what is it? I mean, maybe this is about like developers in general. Like at Red Monk, we're always trying to understand developers. So help me to understand as a developer, what is it about crafting and crochet and all of these things that you are attracted to? Like what appeals to you about doing it?
So you're talking about how it seems like you have a lot of people in tech who just like pick this up. And it's
Yes.
because it uses the same part of your brain. When I was in boot camp, I had to put down every fiber arts thing because it's like you think about like, okay, you're staring at a blank page. If you just start, like it's going to be okay. Run into that at the start of every single craft. You were talking about troubleshooting. Why isn't it doing the exact same thing? Following for loops and while loops and thinking about how the pattern should work just like a program. All of those things are the things that I look for in an interesting developer job, right? Like I am here to solve an interesting problem every single day. That is what keeps me in this job. And that's what keeps me in fiber arts land as well. Like when I think about when I get a little bit bored with like, knitting, I could switch to crochet, but when I get bored with both, then I pick up yet another type of knitting or crochet, right? Because like just having one skein of yarn and knitting something is knitting, but then there's also using multiple colors called color work and double-sided knitting. So you knit both sides of a scarf at the same time and you have a pattern and it's the inverse of each other. And
Whoa.
like crochet as well has mosaic crochet that I have on my list to get into right now because it looks a lot like knitting. You can do the kinds of tiny color changes that it's hard to do in crochet, or like there's a difference between crocheting a scarf or a blanket that's flat and crocheting something that's round, like a hat or a doll, which is called amigurumi and things like that. So there's just like in programming where there's 1,000 things you could be learning today and you will never ever be able to learn everything that there is to know about programming. Fiber arts give that as well. I know when I was working on one costume, I was working on a Queen Serenity Sailor Moon costume, which has the iconic, I think it was Dior dress with the gold embroidery around the thing. And I was like, well, I'll just pick up tambour embroidery because it's the ancestor of crochet. So I can use basically a hook and go almost as fast as I can when I crochet instead of using an embroidery needle, which I love embroidery, but like I feel like I'm threading a needle constantly. It's just like constantly coming off of the needle, and like I wear nails, so like it's tiny, and I'm just sitting there like, just go in, just all the time. So
Yeah.
also that like frustration and knowing when to put something down and stepping away is definitely something that I have learned from programming.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are all good reasons. So it's like it scratches that tinkerer itch, like it gives you something to mess with. And it also sounds like it's just infinitely vast. Like there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
And then also, yeah, it's like the best, you can discover the best tool for the job, the end result that you want to achieve.
Exactly.
Yeah, whether it's like a different programming language or a different library or whatever, different framework.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I started with amigurumi, so the dolls, and when I remember the first time I made something that I could like wear, like actually wear out as like a scarf or something like that, and I was just like, "Oh, this is useful. I can use this. This is cool." And it was kind of the same feeling as that first time that I programmed a button that did something and then clicked it, and I was like, "It did the thing." So like,
Yeah.
that same joy and dopamine rush.
Very cool. So have you used then like ChatGPT or Claude to help you learn some of these new skills like tambour or whatever?
No,
No,
not at all.
not yet. What
No.
have you thought about it? Are other people in the community doing that?
Maybe.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have usage statistics on how often like other people outside of tech are using things because I'm stuck in that tech media bubble, right? Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but I
But it comes
know,
down to documentation, right?
yeah,
If there isn't enough written about it, or if it's like, elsewhere in books or something, then it wouldn't be in Claude to tell you how to do it right.
yeah, it's interesting because I've always been the person to like, okay, I don't think I quite understand this, so I'll just try and see what's wrong with it. And
Yeah.
I have a Kat was also at ViewConf, and I was talking about how my first knitting pattern was a double-sided knitting pattern with color work, and she was just like, "You're a monster. Like, what do you mean?" And so every time I'm like, "You just what? Like it's hard? Like Elle from Legally Blonde?"
Yes.
And
Yes.
people are like, so it's not really like I don't normally go to like maybe someone else can summarize this in words. I'll just bang my head against it until I can figure it out.
Oh man, I love that so much. Okay, so long story history with fiber arts, and so I guess where did you cut your teeth on them? Was it crocheting? Is that your first?
It was crochet. My sister-in-law got me a amigurumi book for Christmas, and I made was his name? They believe it was Ferdinand the Frog. And he
Okay,
had like one leg was bigger than the other, and like he kind of looks like a little bit like kill me, but like I was like I made a thing. I followed the instructions, and so then I like made some more things from the amigurumi book. And my mom she's a certified master knitter and she's been knitting for
oh wow,
a very, very long time. But I always remember her like crafts constantly for like the birthdays. Like, you know, instead of going out and buying a bunch of store-bought decorations, she would hand make a bunch of stuff. And so it's always been part of my life to like, okay, I can buy it, but like, do I want to make it? Does that seem
Yeah.
like a fun thing for me to do? To the point that my husband is still asking where the paintings for our bedroom are a few years later after I started them. But you know, it's a process.
Hey, I know. Leonardo da Vinci carried around his things for years. Tell him to calm down. It's
Yeah.
you know, you got a masterpiece coming.
So I spent like 7 years being like, I have one hook. I'm a hooker. I'm crocheting. It's not
Hmm.
knitting. It's hooking. And then I finally picked up knitting because I walked into Pearl's Yarn Emporium in Asheville, and Rick, one of the owners, has one of those brains where you're just like, I don't know how you like the friend in high school where you'd be like, "Can you help me with my math homework?" And he'd be like, "No, the answer's 7. I don't know how to tell you how to get there." Um, he's made like a scale model of the earth out of little knit triangles and like
Wow.
all the stuff. And so I walked in and the pattern was this scarf, this double knit scarf that had a dungeon map on it. And so all of the D&D monsters inside the dungeon had charms, and like you put them in the corresponding places on the map. And then it also had a D&D adventure associated with it. So you're able to run an entire D&D one shot from the scarf that you had knit. And I was like, guess I have to learn knitting now.
Yeah. And
Everyone
that was it.
was saying, yeah. So after that, it's been a lot like that and like sewing for costumes because I don't typically get to follow a pattern from start to finish. Like, I do a lot of like animated stuff, video games. And so that'll be stuff that doesn't exist in real life, right? So you have to like take a pattern and then tack several things onto it or like change it dramatically. So I dressed up as Barbie for Magnolia JS 2023, and I was mad because I had hand designed all the pleats for the skirt and they were half an inch crooked, and no one is going to notice that, but I'm just sitting there just like furious. And my husband was like, how many times have you actually done a sewing pattern at this point? Like just followed it with the instructions from start to finish. And so it's less of a like, which craft did I start with, and more that I have always had that kind of curiosity and wanting to tinker that goes so well with programming, and probably why I fell in love with it like almost immediately.
Okay. And have you tried to do this, you know, rope core memory thing, the little old lady technique? Is that on your list?
That's a good idea. No, I macrame I feel like is fairly similar. It's a bunch of knots. I haven't done weaving or spinning yet, and I feel like that's probably the next. I joke about the you know, everybody's gonna leave tech and run into the woods and then start a coffee shop or whatever. Mine's
Yes.
the
Yes.
alpaca farm, and then I'm gonna take the fiber from my alpacas and then turn it into yarn, and then once it's spun, maybe I'll weave it or whatever. Some of that is like, where am I gonna put a loom or a wheel? But you know, I'll figure it out. Uh,
Yeah.
there's always something to learn. It was funny when I was learning soldering and electronics at CodeMash. They were like, okay, now you can like build a proximity sensor that does an alarm when somebody comes by. You could use this for like some computer thing. And I was like, if you think I have learned this for any reason other than to make costumes light up, you are sorely mistaken. That is what I will be doing. You have taught me how to make the light up, and that is exactly what I want.
Yep. 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 Oh man, that is funny. So I know you're very goal oriented with your projects, right? It's like, what is the best tool to achieve this end?
Somewhat.
Yeah, and
But I also, like, I was talking to someone and they hadn't considered it. Like, you were talking about your friends while the TV is on will be knitting or crocheting. And so
yeah,
I see it as like a fidget because I'm very hyperactive. So, like, you know, if I'm in a doctor's waiting room, that's like torture for me. But if I'm working on something, and then I'm just working on something. And it took me a long time, but I finally did let go of any expectations that I would finish it. Unless it's like, I'm giving this to a person for Christmas, there's a reason for there to be a deadline. So, like, very, very long-term projects. I worked on this one cabled shawl for literally years. That I'm able to let go of. And that transferred into when my first professional developer job, I was having a really hard time with the fact that software is never finished. It's never perfect.
Mm,
It's never like you're always going to
right.
be working on something and iterating on something. And I was like, I need the dopamine. I need the check mark. We've done this. It's done. And then you're coming back to me and being like, well, I mean, yeah, it's done, but we could also improve upon it like infinitely. And so those two concepts kind of melded together, and I was finally able to accept that. And that's something Narando, another mutual friend of ours, recently this year was coming to me and being like, and we have to, and I was like, it's never going to be done. It's never going to be perfect. I need
Yeah.
you to internalize that.
Oh, that is such a good point. I often have talked about as a front end engineer at a digital marketing agency. I never had the issue of like burnout that I talked to a lot of other developers about, and I believe it was the dopamine of everything that I built went live.
Yeah.
It showed up online.
Yeah.
Yes, we would redo it all the time, but there was never that moment of like, no, the product manager decided to just scrap it, or like it just went away. These folks are working on a project for a year and then it's just, nothing. And so I feel like the ephemerality of these projects. It's like you want something that exists in the world at the end of the day. And I love that idea of like, it can still scratch that itch of like the tinkerer and the builder, but it will be a thing. It will exist. And, I feel like we can't put a price on that. So that, I don't know, this is making a lot of sense to me.
I agree. I definitely agree. Luckily, my first senior, I mean, not luckily, he had some chatbot that he had been working on for like 2 years get shelved. And it came up again, like while I was there, and he was just like, the chatbot that will never see light of day. So like I already knew that was a possibility before I ever got in that situation myself. But then it turned into, you hit mid and you're like, what are the best practices? What do I like? How do I get better? Like at it? And then you start seeing everything as an opportunity to refactor. And that got me stuck in the mire for a while. And like, and then I had to wholesale rewrite it out. And I was like, maybe I don't want to refactor ever again in my
This is terrible.
I'm done refactoring, I swear.
Yeah. Yeah. I know the ephemerality of code is such an interesting thing. And I feel like it just like touches on this, I don't know, the core of a lot of the, I guess, the personalities of the developers that I've spent time with. Because in a way, it's like the whole goal. Like, obviously, we want to be able to keep working on a thing and make sure that it can keep evolving, right? And as we have new information and all of this. But at the same time, there is something primal about having our work be meaningful. And in a way, having a physical thing is meaning. Like, that gives you that meaning. So I don't know. I feel like that's something I'm still trying to work through myself. And I have heard folks talk about AI that way of like, well, you know what? You want to refactor this to a different version of Java, just throw it in Claude and it's done. Okay. And nobody's sad anymore. Like, you didn't just waste 6 months of your life.
I have a friend who is very wise. And one of the things he said to me one day was just like, yeah, everything we work on is in computer. And when you close computer, it goes away. And so I posted that at some point, and people take that very drastically different ways. Like the way that we were talking about it was like, not that means that it has no meaning and we shouldn't pay attention to it or anything. But like when you get really bogged down and like all my life identity and my meaning is all coming from this thing that's in computer, maybe it's time to close the computer and go touch grass.
Touch grass. It's time.
Yeah.
It's time. Or knit something. Maybe knit a scarf.
All of
Take a day.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and I've seen plenty of talks from men who are suddenly like, I had a life crisis and I realized my family exists. Or like,
oh no,
I'm a cancer survivor. And like, yeah, you really learn when you have a major health issue that like time with loved ones is like the thing, the bread and butter of life. So like, not to say that anything we're doing inside computer has no meaning, but like if it's the only thing that is giving your life meaning, there's a whole world outside of computer. So,
oh man, that's heavy. Okay,
we're talking.
Let me ask you. It's so important, Abby. I mean, you're right. And I think that's why I wanted you to come on here and talk about the fiber arts thing, because I feel like it does touch on this core part of our identities that you found a way to access, and that is so meaningful to a lot of the people that I know. So I don't know. I just I thank you for shining a light on it, bringing more people into the fold of something that they might find cathartic, and the history, of course, is really beautiful. My God, and it's got the social justice thing too. I mean, Jesus, we could have spent the whole time talking about that. Working class women.
I got a whole another blog for that. We'll do that another time. This is why you should hang out with us at conferences.
It's true. It's true. Abby speaks only truth. Okay. Well, let me go ahead and wrap it up there. Abby, for folks who want to follow your musings on fiber arts and other things in the tech industry, where do you direct those individuals?
If you want my portfolio, that's abbeyperini.dev. If you want my writing, that's abbeyperini.com. If you want to buy stickers, that's abbeyperini.shop. And then my handle is Abbey Perini on everything that I'm on, which I think is Blue Sky and LinkedIn right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
You can find me.
All right. Well, again, my name is Kate Holterhoff. I'm a senior analyst at Red Monk. My guest today has been Abbey Perini. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and review the MonkCast on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching us on Red Monk's YouTube channel, please like, subscribe, and engage with us in the comments.